She thought she was just fixing a stranger's broken car on a rainy night. But that simple act pulled her into a world of secrets, lies, and danger, and by the end, she would uncover the shocking truth about who he really was. The rain poured down in heavy sheets, drumming against the tin roof of Sarah Miller's tiny auto shop on the outskirts of town. It was almost midnight, and she was exhausted after a long day of patching up old trucks and secondhand cars. Her hands were stained with grease, her clothes damp with sweat, and her thoughts clouded with worry. Business had been painfully slow for weeks, and the bills kept piling up. Every night, she wondered how much longer she could keep her little garage alive. Just as she locked up and stepped outside into the storm, the faint glow of headlights caught her eye. At the side of the empty road, a sleek black sedan sat idling, steam hissing from under its hood. Next to it stood a man, waving frantically, his suit jacket soaked through with rain. Sarah hesitated. It wasn't unusual for people to break down near her shop, but something about the man's expensive car and polished shoes didn't fit the usual picture of her struggling customers. Still, leaving someone stranded in the storm felt wrong. Grabbing her worn toolbox, she trudged over through the puddles. The man introduced himself simply as Daniel. His voice carried a calm authority, even though his situation was desperate. Engine overheated, he muttered, wiping rain from his face. Sarah lifted the hood, squinting at the steaming mess inside. Years of experience took over. She tightened a loose hose, patched a leak with quick thinking, and adjusted the coolant levels. Sparks of lightning lit up the sky as her hands worked skillfully in the dark. Daniel watched her intently, not speaking much, but there was something about the way his eyes followed her, sharp, assessing, as if he were studying more than just her work. Within half an hour, Sarah slammed the hood shut. "Try it now," she said. The engine roared back to life, purring smoothly. Relief crossed Daniel's face for a brief moment, and then he did something that surprised her. He pulled out a 100 bill, pressed it into her oil-stained hand, and gave her a faint smile. "You just saved my night," he said before slipping into the driver's seat. Sarah stood in the rain, watching the sedan disappear into the darkness. She had no way of knowing that this stranger wasn't just a passing customer. This chance meeting was the start of a story that would change her life forever. The next morning, Sarah shuffled into her garage with heavy eyelids and sore muscles. She hadn't slept much, her mind replaying the strange encounter with Daniel over and over. She told herself it was nothing, just another stranded motorist, though a wealthier one than she was used to. But as she walked up to her shop, her footsteps slowed. Parked neatly outside was the same sleek black sedan. Leaning casually against the hood was Daniel, though now he looked like a completely different man. Gone was the rain-soaked stranger in disheveled clothes. He wore a crisp tailored suit, polished shoes, and an expression that radiated confidence. "Morning, Sarah," he said smoothly, as though they were old acquaintances. Sarah frowned, confused. "What are you doing here?" "I came to talk business." He straightened, his eyes sharp and unreadable. "You saved me last night, and I don't forget things like that. I run a company, a very large company. We design and build cars. And I think someone like you has no business wasting away in a dusty little shop." Sarah laughed nervously, certain he was joking. "I'm just a small-town mechanic. I fix old trucks with duct tape and prayers. You've got the wrong person." But Daniel didn't smile. Instead, he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "What I saw last night wasn't luck. It was skill. You think fast, you work hard, and you don't back down. That's exactly what I need on my team." The words hung in the air, tempting her like an impossible dream. For years, Sarah had scraped by, taking odd jobs just to pay rent. Her shop was drowning in debt, and creditors were already circling. Yet she clung to her independence fiercely, terrified of losing herself to anyone else's authority. I don't know," she stammered. "This place is my life." Daniel's gaze softened, but his tone carried a quiet pressure. "Sometimes, to move forward, you have to let go. Think about it. Opportunities like this don't come twice." He handed her a sleek business card embossed with his name. Then, without waiting for her reply, he climbed into his car and drove away. Sarah stood frozen, the card trembling in her hand. She knew better than to trust strangers. But deep down, a flicker of hope stirred. Hope that maybe this was the lifeline she had been waiting for. Little did she know, stepping into Daniel's world meant stepping straight into the shadows of danger. The first weeks at Daniel's company felt surreal to Sarah. One moment, she had been struggling to keep her garage alive. The next, she was walking through glass-paneled hallways lined with state-of-the-art machines and engineers in crisp uniforms. The building itself seemed alive with energy, a constant hum of machinery, the smell of metal and oil, and the shine of cars so advanced they looked years ahead of anything she had ever worked on. Daniel gave her a position that surprised everyone: head mechanic on a confidential project. Most newcomers started at the bottom, yet Sarah had been placed directly under Daniel's watchful eye. At first, she felt proud. He often asked for her advice on prototypes, listening carefully, even when her answers were simple. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt respected in a room full of experts. But soon, she noticed things that unsettled her. The employees walked on eggshells around Daniel. Conversations died the moment he entered. His presence carried weight, a quiet threat that made people nervous. One engineer whispered a joke about a faulty design, and within days, he was gone. Officially, he had resigned, but Sarah didn't believe it. One late evening, Sarah stayed behind to finish some work on an experimental engine. Through the thin walls, she overheard Daniel's voice in his office, low, sharp, and dangerous. "You're not going anywhere until this is done," he snapped. A pause followed, then his voice dropped even lower. "And remember, accidents happen all the time." Her hands trembled on the wrench. The next morning, she learned the man Daniel had argued with, a mid-level manager named Harris, had abruptly moved out of town. No farewell, no goodbyes, just gone. That night, unease gnawed at her. Curiosity got the better of her, and she began quietly researching Daniel. What she found chilled her. Several former employees had vanished without explanation. Rivals who once competed with his company had gone bankrupt after sudden accidents destroyed their factories. Local papers hinted at corruption, but never named him directly. Daniel wasn't just a brilliant CEO. He was a man who controlled people through fear, a man who erased those who got in his way. Sarah realized the truth with a sinking feeling. By stepping into his company, she had stepped into a trap she might never escape. Sarah told herself she would quit. She rehearsed the words in her head, even wrote a resignation letter she never sent. Every day, she woke up with a pit in her stomach. Yet every night, Daniel pulled her deeper into his orbit. He trusted her more than anyone else, gave her access to confidential blueprints, and praised her sharp instincts in front of executives who usually looked at her with skepticism. But Sarah wasn't fooled. His praise was a leash, tying her closer to him. The more responsibility she took, the harder it became to walk away. One evening, Daniel appeared at her workbench, his presence sending a hush across the lab. "Come with me," he said. "I want to show you something." She followed him reluctantly, her nerves prickling. Outside, a sleek prototype car gleamed under the fluorescent lights of the testing garage. Its smooth silver body reflected the shadows of the night. "Get in," Daniel ordered casually, sliding into the driver's seat. Sarah hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to say no. But refusing Daniel was dangerous, and she knew it. So she climbed in. The doors shut with a heavy click that sounded far too final. The car roared to life, speeding down a deserted highway under the cover of darkness. At first, Daniel spoke of business, new markets, future designs, but then his tone shifted. "I know you've been asking questions," he said quietly, his hands steady on the wheel. "That's dangerous, Sarah. But you're different. You remind me of myself when I was young. You see things others don't." Her throat tightened. "I just want to do my job." Daniel's lips curled into a faint smile. "It's more than a job now. You're either with me or against me." Before she could respond, the car suddenly swerved. Sarah's eyes darted to the dashboard. The brakes weren't responding. Panic surged through her veins. Daniel didn't even look alarmed. "Consider this a test," he said. The vehicle hurtled forward, the speedometer climbing. Sarah's pulse pounded, but her mechanic's instincts kicked in. She grabbed the gear shift, forcing it down, and used the emergency brake in a desperate move. The car screeched, metal grinding, before finally skidding to a stop inches from a barrier. Her hands shook violently. Daniel's calm smile never wavered. "Impressive," he murmured. "Now I know for sure. You belong here." Sarah understood in that moment. Daniel hadn't invited her into his company to give her a future. He had lured her into his trap, and walking away was no longer an option. Sarah barely slept after the terrifying test drive. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Daniel's calm face, his smile as the car spun out of control. It wasn't a mistake. He had wanted to watch her fight for survival, to prove she was worthy. But to her, it was proof of something else. She was trapped in the hands of a man who played with lives as if they were pieces on a chessboard. Still, Sarah pretended nothing had changed. She forced herself to act loyal, to nod during meetings, to take on projects without question. On the inside, though, she was planning her escape. Quietly, she began collecting evidence, copies of financial records, hidden recordings of Daniel's threats, notes of strange disappearances. Each file felt like a ticking bomb in her hands. Weeks passed until the day came when she finally had enough. She reached out to law enforcement in secret, passing along everything she had. They didn't seem surprised. In fact, it was clear Daniel had been on their radar for years, but they had never been able to pin him down. Sarah's evidence changed everything. The trap finally closed, but not on her. It happened during a high-profile board meeting. Daniel stood at the head of the table, commanding the room with his usual sharp presence. Sarah sat quietly, pretending to take notes, her heart racing as the doors burst open and federal agents stormed in. Gasps echoed around the room. Papers scattered. Daniel Grant, the lead agent, barked. "You're under arrest for fraud, extortion, and conspiracy." For the first time, Sarah saw him falter. His jaw clenched, but his eyes flicked toward her, not with anger, but with something unreadable, almost like pride. He was led away in handcuffs, and the company erupted in chaos. Employees whispered, board members panicked, and the empire he had built began to crumble. But then came the twist Sarah never expected. In Daniel's private office, investigators discovered a sealed folder. Inside were documents naming Sarah Miller as his chosen successor. Legal transfers, signatures, everything in order. The struggling mechanic who once worked out of a broken garage was suddenly the new CEO of one of the country's most powerful automotive companies. But instead of triumph, Sarah felt a chill. She couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel had planned this all along, that even from behind bars, he had placed her exactly where he wanted her.